All right. Welcome to another episode of the Growth Compass, where we seek direction in the ocean of business growth opportunities. Today, we have a very special guest, Kate Williams. And you can start out with a little introduction of yourself. Kate, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I'm Kate Williams, CEO of 1% for the Planet, which is a global nonprofit focused on engaging companies in giving back to create positive environmental impacts.
Awesome. So there is a lot available to read about 1% for the Planet and for you personally. So there's just around 1,000 questions that I have for you that I hope we can squeeze in, and before the episode is over. But before we start, just a little context. Where are you calling in from in the world?
I am right now in Burlington, Vermont, which is where our office is located. We have a mostly remote staff, but we do have a headquarters office in Burlington, Vermont, and there are about 12 of us based in Vermont who kind of flow in and out of here. So I'm here
Awesome.
today.
Cool. So, how long have you been with 1% now?
I've been 1% for 11 years.
Let's go. And just for some context, so before you'd started your journey with 1% for the Planet, which I'm very interested in speaking about for a majority of the time, but just for some context beforehand, how did you get into the space or interested in uh, the environment or nonprofit space or anything around that?
Yeah, I basically was in the environmental space my whole career. I started out as an outdoor educator just because that was something I loved. I fell in love with the outdoors through getting out in big mountains. So I realized, like, well, if me falling in love was what kind of motivated me to want to take care of the planet, like, how about I do the work of engaging other people in the opportunity to fall in love with the big outdoors? So that was a focus of mine initially, right after I graduated from college. And then I shifted into the environmental nonprofit space, not so much out of a particular. I mean, my main drive was I didn't know where else I could do mission driven work. I think now there are opportunities in the for-profit and not-for-profit sector to focus on purpose or mission driven work. But as I was sort of coming up, I really felt like it was kind of the only way to go was to work in the nonprofit sector. So that is where I have been, and it's been a.
Awesome. So you went from college to that position. Was that always in the Northeast around Vermont type
No, I
area?
actually was in New Mexico, which is in the western U.S. for the first 10 years. I was an outdoor educator in that neck of the woods, kind of western canyons, big mountains, big rivers, which was really fun and beautiful. And then I've been in the Northeast, but I would say, 1% for the Planet is really global, and our staff is based all over the US and in Europe. So, it's great. I'm based in, tiny little rural, beautiful Vermont, but I do work, I'm very much a kind of global citizen in terms of my work.
Gotcha. And so before entering your position, which has been in leadership for most of your time there, let's just touch on, I guess, like two significant experiences in the nonprofit space that taught you how things worked, or that this was a place that was fulfilling this aspect of mission driven work.
Yeah. Well, I guess one experience was a hard one, which was right after 9/11, a year following 9/11, which people may not remember, but that was, markets took a hit and a lot of foundations constrained their funding or shifted their funding. And so I was program director at a nonprofit, and I actually got laid off, which was not what I had in mind, not what I wanted, not part of my plan. And, it was a really hard moment, but looking back, it was a really pivotal moment because coming out of that, it's somehow my like takeaway from that was two things. One was I never wanted to be in a position again where someone else could make a decision about my life in that way. And then second was I wanted to like get really clear about what I wanted and say what I wanted, which may sound like odd outcomes of an experience like that, but it really did kind of just galvanize me to just take control of my path a little bit more than I think I had. And that led me to my next role becoming an executive director of a nonprofit, which I did for 10 years before then moving to 1% for the Planet uh, 11 years ago.
Gotcha. So then that 10-year position as executive director was also environmentally focused nonprofit.
It was called the Northern Forest Canoe Trail. It was a sort of recreational paddle trail, and we did all the mapping and sort of very kind of recreation and conservation focused, and a lot of community economic development work. And that was regional. That was in northern New York and northern New England and up into
Like
Quebec. It was pretty awesome.
around the Adirondacks.
Yeah, yeah. So it went from the western edge of the Adirondacks up to northern Maine.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great job. It was when my kids were younger too, so we did a lot of paddling and it was great.
Okay, that's so well, a lot a lot of the same I think it's very fascinating the position of an executive director at a nonprofit because it varies so widely in responsibilities and the types of support, and you manage not only your own team but also a board of directors, so you're almost like two-way leader in that way. And so, if I allow myself, I'll get into the questions about that experience. But mainly, so 1% from the Planet, you went from being executive director for 10 years, into I think director of partnerships at 1% for the Planet, right? So, I guess could you explain
Mm,
like what a director of partnerships is and how that relates to, I guess, business model, the growth model of a
yeah,
nonprofit?
yeah, sure. So I was at Northern Forest Canoe Trail for 10 years as executive director, and then I think I didn't use this language at the time, but I think I was a little burnt out. I mean, it was a small nonprofit. I sort of came in as the first hired ED after the founders, and it was basically growing a startup. And I was also raising my kids at that time, and like all the things. And so at 10 years, I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm ready for a change. And so I moved over to 1% for the Planet, through kind of a combination of serendipity and planning, I would say, which is how most of my life has unfolded.
Yeah.
And I moved into a director of partnerships role thinking like maybe I don't want to be ED or the leader anymore. Maybe I'm ready to become more of a content area specialist. And it was a really good thing to do because I realized that absolutely was not what I wanted to do. So I know that wasn't your question, but just from I would say that's the other like pivot moment to your earlier
Great. No, that's
question,
great
because
context. Yeah.
it really like basically after a few months, when it was kind of nice for a few months not to be the one worrying about payroll and stuff like that, I realized like the way my brain works is to think in terms of the strategy, to think in terms of like growing all the stakeholder relationships. I just felt like constrained as the director of partnerships, even though partnerships are a core piece of 1% for the Planet. So I became CEO after a year. It just so happened as I was having that like journey of realization, the
Yeah.
then CEO had left. And so I had the opportunity to move into
Serendipity.
that role. Yes, definitely. But I would say, and so we actually eliminated the director of partnerships role when I became CEO, not because partnerships weren't important, but more because we realized like everything we do is partnerships. So every role had to be, really focused on partnerships. We've actually just now, just in the last few months, like identified a strategic partnerships role at a very different stage in the organization. We're 5 times bigger, all the things. So it's a different, really appropriate, awesome role. But after I started, it really was more about integrating a sort of partnerships sensibility and practice across the whole organization.
Awesome. So something that's specifically interesting to me that we talked about a little bit was defining growth, because this whole podcast, a lot of my conversations are about how people go about growing their business, and a lot of it
Hmm.
is in the for-profit space, and you're in the nonprofit space. And so
Hmm.
I guess I'll let you choose how you want to answer this, because, like you just said, it's very different when you first took on the CEO role than it is now. And you can answer both, but I'm curious what it means to you, how you and your team define success as far as growth. Because from my perspective, it could be like I've interned in some nonprofits and I have some mentors that are EDs, but it could be like, more grant revenue or like more impact. However, you choose to define
Hmm.
that, even though it's more subjective. So, how do you define success with growth, either back then
Yeah.
and now?
Yeah. And I would say it hasn't shifted. It's become, more like refined and complex in certain ways as I've been here. But like our view, my view on growth for 1% for the planet is dual impact and revenue focused. And the reason I say it that way is I'm a big proponent of, if nonprofits only focus on impact without also thinking about how they're going to resource that impact, they're not going to be able to drive that impact for the long term. So, I really focus on running 1% for the planet with this is, kind of shorthand, but with a business sensibility in that, very much focused on like, if we grow our revenue, we're able to invest a lot more in growing impact. So the key metrics that we have are our certified impact. And I can like describe our model, but that's our key metric of our impact. So we certify the dollars that our companies, our member companies, are allocating to environmental partners. We certify that every year, so we have a very objective tracking of that number, and then we tally that up across the lifetime of 1% for the planet. So like, as of right now, we've certified over the lifetime of 1% for the planet about 700 million US dollars in impact. And our goal, our twofold goal, is to get to 1 billion in lifetime impact in the next couple of years, and then to get to the next billion at an accelerated rate, to sort of build the organization that can get to that next billion faster. We're very aware that in order to do that, we have to have strong operating revenue and strong kind of operating efficiency in terms of how we deploy that revenue to drive impact. So we also track that very closely.
So is that revenue number that you just spoke of separated for in your guys' framework of growth and success from the certified impact number?
Yes. So our certified impact of 100 million is the impact dollars being driven by our companies. And then we track our revenue that comes directly into our organization, which is a much smaller number. But it's interesting because we're essentially, when you sort of look at like comparable foundations, like on an annual basis, we're directing about 100 million US dollars giving globally, which is, not a small enterprise. Our budget size, which has also grown, it's our impact, just to give you sort of scale of our growth. When I joined, our lifetime impact was about 100 million US dollars certified. So in the first 12 years of the organization, we had certified 100 million. Last year, we certified 100 million in that single year. So we've grown. That's one sort of measure of how we've grown. When I started, our organizational operating revenue was under 2 million. And now our operating revenue is just about 8 million. So, in both cases, we've grown. And they are tethered together because we get a dues fee as a portion of the 1%, but that is, we really carefully track both.
Gotcha. So okay, so how I understand so far, you guys have dual metrics. One is a very specific dollar amount around your impact, which is the certified impact dollars, and then you have your revenue number. So which is really cool to hear from me because it answers from the, I don't know, like everyone's driven by profit. And so if you just want to replace profit with like, hey, how much certified impact are we doing this quarter or this month? Or like, what is this growth strategy? How can we measure it in certified impact in dollars? So I think I understand that correctly. So I have two follow-up questions to that. One about how you guys go about growing the company, but also it's a really interesting framework for me to understand how to measure success within a nonprofit. Is this, in your opinion, is this something that is this framework of understanding something that can be applied to most nonprofits as far as like certified impact dollars versus revenue, or is it something that's specific to your guys' business model?
I think that specific like category of impact is unique to us. Like, it's entirely based on our model, which is that we have member companies who join, and their commitment, which we certify annually, is to allocate 1% of their revenues to environmental partners. And we vet those partners, we advise those companies on their strategy, and then we certify the giving that they do. And so I think, that specific number is unique to us, but I would think, my view, if any nonprofit I would lead, would want it to get really clear on, what are the key items, goals that we need to have measurable targets against so we know that we're making progress to the stated impact that we're trying to achieve. And we have some other ones as well, like we track the number of members and donors that are involved in the work that we're doing, because that ladders up to those impact dollars, and some other things as well. So our specific impact bucket is a unique one for us, but I think any nonprofit would want to have, and I think company as well would want to have, like, are you hitting your revenue numbers, your operating numbers, to enable you to do your thing? And then is your thing selling a widget, selling impact, whatever it may be, are you tracking that? So I think that's like super rough cut, but I do think, you got to get clear on what goes into particularly your like purpose or impact or thing sales bucket. But I think that is less different than similar in a lot of ways.
Cool. So as far as this this model goes, let's start with when, because I'm sure this has changed every year that you've been a part of it. But let's go back to when you first started. What were your main approaches to growth, to growing, and then by growth, I assume we mean growing in the certified impact dollars and then also revenue. So what were your
Yeah,
approaches to doing that?
it's a great question because it has evolved like over the years. So when I started, we had 12 people and about 1,000 members, and we were mostly in the US, but we had some globally. Today we have 50 staff members, about 5,000 members, and our membership is more outside of the US than in the US. So like,
Wow.
how do we get from here to there? The majority of that growth was organically driven, meaning we had inbound leads that would come to us mainly through awareness and engagement efforts. We had some, warm referrals and things like that, but we were such a small team that we were super opportunistic. So we did a lot of work on building our brand, probably more so than other nonprofits, just because we've had an awareness from the get-go that the brand matters a lot, because essentially part of what members access when they participate in our model is a logo and a brand,
Right.
a halo saying this member is doing what they say they're doing. It's a credible commitment. It's recognized by consumers, and consumers see it and choose it because it enables them to feel like their purchasing dollars are going to impact. So, we definitely focused on brand building, and it really wasn't until just a few years ago that we started developing more of a structured outbound sales process. And I'd say we're still kind of early in our journey of developing that sales capability. So we benefit from the network effect and still benefit from that brand awareness, but our sort of key strategies are, pretty like standard inbound and outbound strategies that we're really, right now kind of working to gin up. During COVID, I'd say 2019 to 2021 was one of our biggest growth periods, and that was almost entirely organic inbound. And I think it was like an interesting convergence of like
That
pre-existing
is so
consumer
interesting.
trends, companies with time on their hands during the COVID, and then, certain sectors doing quite well during COVID, and so having resources to be able to engage.
So it's only a couple years ago that because from my perspective, and great job on you guys, with your branding. But from my perspective, your guys' brand is huge. You guys are a huge player in in the nonprofit space, and so in my ignorance, I would assume that you guys, have like a hefty amount of resources allocated to growth. But that's really interesting to hear that it's only a few years ago that you guys started to define more structured outbound outreach.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it is. It's interesting to us too. And to be clear, it's not like we weren't doing the sales, but it was more that, an account manager would also be engaged in sort of sales and onboarding conversations. So, we had the sort of classic people were wearing many
Sure.
hats.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, and that makes us excited because as we really develop this, capacity, we're excited to grow. And, we really benefit a lot from a brand standpoint. And this is like the beauty of our model is that it's a network shared message. So all of our members are sharing the logo, and many of them, most of them are talking about their membership and sharing partnership stories. So we get this great kind of network effect of the story radiating out.
So then, just to indulge my curiosity, what is it? Because something that started this podcast was an interest in outbound outreach, specifically cold email, which has to do with the sponsor being senders, who helps people do cold email and stuff like that. But it was just so interesting to me how different people were going about this and all of the new tactics that were coming out, especially given, I think, all of the attention to the like inbound blog marketing like thing that was I think popularized by HubSpot, which sounded like you guys really benefited from for a long time. So as far as it stands right now, what are your guys' strategies around outbound and inbound, and how why how's it going for you,
Hmm.
for you guys
Hmm.
specifically?
Yeah, I think sort of our emerging learnings are that, to become a 1% for the planet member, so essentially to decide to buy membership, just to like use that language, is more akin to kind of opting into an experience than it is to buying a thing. So it's a more, there, it just takes more like engagement and relationship building. So, awareness and like opportunities for like learning and engagement are really important, much more than like, there aren't kind of quick sales in the kind of business that we do, because it's a commitment that requires like a long-term investment and understanding, a long-term investment of like kind of strategic time. Not that that's a heavy investment. We think it's a great like lift investment, but
Right.
people like need to sort of understand it. It's, again, it's not like, buying a new phone or shampoo or whatever. It's not even like buying a one-time event.
Sure.
It's much more like choosing college or something like that. But again, like I don't want to make it sound onerous, but it is like an exciting but lengthier process. So I do think we really try and focus on things like a kind of surround of thought leadership, awareness and engagement opportunities, leveraging our network so that we have the sort of positive peer referrals, and or positive peer pressure and things like that, all of that to drive both inbound interest. So on that inbound side, that's a lot
Sure.
of what we're doing, and then creating lots of ways to point people to like learn more or talk to us, like we want you to kind of take that step to become join the learning process. On the outbound side, we really try to focus on just a variety of different strategies, like how can we get in conversation with people. And warm leads are always great, and so we referrals and things like that. And we also do just campaigns to see who we can reach. So, and again, we're still kind of learning and practicing and really trying to get good at testing stuff, and if it doesn't work, testing other stuff, and setting ourselves up to learn. But I would say those are some of where our learning has led us today.
Awesome. Cool. There's I'm forgetting the name, which is tragic because it's such an impactful TED Talk to me, which I'm sure you've heard about it. And it is essentially speaking about how the nonprofit sector, there's stigma around operating a nonprofit similarly to a business, and it hinders nonprofit leaders from being able to grow their businesses. Do you know the name of it? So you give it.
I don't know if I know which one you're talking about, but I certainly have heard that. I mean,
Okay.
when we like we use this language of sales, and we have gotten some pushback. We had to manage it both internally and with our board to say it's okay. And we have, I have many board members and staff members who are like, yes, let's like talk that way. But it was interesting. We did have to make sure that it wasn't, we had to manage some voices who were concerned that that was like a crass commercial
Yeah.
tactic. I mean, again, back to my point of like, if we don't have resources, we can't drive our mission. And particularly as a membership organization, meaning we have business members who we want to be with us for the long term, we've got to be well resourced in order to be with them for the long term. We've got to be well resourced to have great staff members who can provide great service. So to me, being able to talk about both sales, like going after impact, like that's essentially what we're selling is impact. And we want to bring, you know, stakeholders in who can help us to do that. So that's our opportunity, but also to be able to not shy away from saying like we want to grow our operating revenue as well, because that's how we're able to do all the things that enable us. But you're absolutely right. Like it's an really interesting. The nonprofit landscape is just interesting in that way because there can be, I think, sometimes driven by the funder community, there can be perception of nonprofit staff shouldn't get paid too much. You know, they're fueled by passion, and to me, that's like logically inconsistent because we have to pay the same rents as everyone else. We have to pay the same prices for everything as everyone else. So smart people are not going to stay in a place where, you know, where passion is not going to pay their rent for them. And so I think there really is an important shift that is happening, but needs to happen more to, you know, make it clear that important, excellent nonprofit work should, uh, you know, cost real money in the same way that important, excellent work in the for-profit sector costs real money. None of it needs to, in my view, be, you know, paid at some of the levels that you see at the higher end of some things. I think we do need to have a, you know, a governor on, you know, some of the upper end in my view, but nonprofits, like investing in good nonprofits, there should be respect for the need to, you know, pay salaries, you know that like the same needs to drive. We're small businesses, we're mid-sized businesses. We have the same needs as small and mid-sized businesses to perform excellent work.
Yeah. So if there's a I feel very strongly about what you're saying, so I just want to capture it for a young, talented, potentially leader in a nonprofit situation. How have you managed those conversations? Because I do think it is really beneficial to somebody trying to grow their impact. And so, how have you managed the conversation around? Well, we do need to spend on marketing. We do need to spend on sales or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
conversation
Mm-hmm.
could be. But how would you advise somebody to go about that with their own board, with their own grant
I
writing?
think, you know, I think it's an iterative process, but I think the key things are being able to provide clarity around how investments drive the returns on impact in our case that you want to see. Because I think, you know, any board should, whether it's for a for profit or a not for profit organization, should at least be curious, you know, at best be kind of disciplined about the way we're allocating resources should be delivering our strategy. Like that's what a board should be looking at. So a nonprofit leader should be able to build a clear like storyline and ability to report on by investing in these staff members, these resources, this, you know, marketing, we are going to be able to over this time period, because sometimes it's not immediate, attain these results. And to me, that's where it's like, it's not materially different than what a business leader is doing. It's just a sort of different, like underlying selling point. Like, again, like some people might be uncomfortable with this, but we're essentially selling impact. And so we need to make sure we're demonstrating that that's what we're like producing well, getting into the marketplace, that it's getting picked up. So I think doing the work, and it, you know, we had to take some time to get there to figure out how do we create a simple way to report on that, and how are we able to build our budgets such that we're able to demonstrate that these dollars drive these results. And we don't always get it right, but the better, again, the same as any business, if in a given year you miss the mark on something, then that gives you data of like, did we make the wrong investments? Did we underperform against the investments that we made? Did we underinvest? And are we simply like not seeing results because we couldn't have seen results? So I think, again, I don't think those are different questions than what a good business leader would ask. It's just in that different context.
Awesome. That's so cool. I have just a couple more questions out of the thousands. I've tried to organize them for you from your position, because you're just speaking about an awesome awesome friction that you working through. Is there a single the biggest problem that you're working through now?
I would say biggest challenge is relates to kind of what I was just talking about is, and it's also our biggest opportunity. And that's kind of how I like think about
Yeah,
things,
that's what
but
I'm talking about.
is narrowing down to really clear priorities and not getting like spread too thin in too many different directions. So making sure that we're allocating our limited resources of capacity and money and on the most important drivers that will, you know, and like grow our revenues such that we can then invest in more that will grow our impact so that we're really meeting our mission goals. So I think doing the work to get really clear on where do we most need to focus and how do we structure that and like make sure that we do that organizationally, because there's always a lot to be done. I think it's very easy to get pulled in different directions or just to have competing priorities. So how do we kind of create the right narrow scope of focus that best moves us forward? I would say that's our challenge and our opportunity.
And how are you addressing that?
I have an awesome leadership team, and we are, having really good conversations and are also like kind of disciplining ourselves to like at a certain point we have to just stop talking and say, okay, this is where we got to for this year. This is our plan. This is what our focus is. We've learned a lot, and now like we'll stir that into the pot for next year's planning process. So but I would say, I think for me, a key is creating the space for really good leaders to like lead and interact with each other and to let that process help, because those discussions, that team has really done an awesome job of getting us clear on like, we need to narrow down to this focus. And it's been through the process of kind of giving the smart leaders kind of space for the conversation, some of which can sometimes be hard, but then like letting the kind of good friction kind of lead to a smooth path has been, I think, really helpful for us.
Awesome. Awesome. Some more existential questions for you as we close the episode, because I think your perspective is incredible. I think the way that you think about things so far, the way that it's really awesome listening to how you think about things. So the first one is, given all of your experience in this space, do you, and I guess referencing our conversation about the stigma and things like this, do you feel, as far as this question of delivering impact, selling impact, do you feel like the nonprofit model, the nonprofit sector of society is working, is doing that?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, because like I personally don't get hung up on that. I focus on like I am the CEO of an entity that happens to be structured as a 501(c)(3). So I need to, you know, ensure that I'm running it in ways that are compliant with that. But most of the time, I'm not thinking about that. Most of the time, I'm thinking about I have a goal, purpose that we're driving towards. I have an awesome group of people. How do we organize ourselves to get there? And how do I make sure all those people are paid as well as I possibly can in the context of, our work, have what they need to do good work, have, that we have a good culture. Like, how do we do all of those things, right? Which I don't think have a whole lot to do with the fact that we're a 501(c)(3). I really tried to not, focus on that. I think the nonprofit sector generally, I don't, there's so much variation within it that it's hard to speak to it. I think the nonprofits that thrive are the ones that stay really clear on what they're trying to accomplish, how they're investing in it. And I think a lot of those nonprofits are doing great. I think the nonprofits that struggle, either it's just hard for them to find the resources and get off the ground. And, there can be those like kind of gates that any of us have to get through. And it's the same with startups. Like sometimes it's just hard to get
Yeah.
that like momentum. But um, I don't know if I'm fully answering your question. I wouldn't say I'm worried about the nonprofit sector. I do think business or nonprofit, the key is to get really clear on where you're going and then to lead the group of people structured in the way that they're structured, again, whatever that sort of underlying legal structure is, in ways that provide sort of clarity, support, and direction so that that entity can like accomplish what it's setting out to
Yeah.
accomplish.
Well, I mean that does answer the question. I think in a different way, because rooted in my question was the opinion that there's something inherent to the nonprofit model that makes it strictly different from a for-profit model, which there is legally. But what I believe I understand from what you speaking to is that conceptually it's not. So
That's my view. And I know there are probably nonprofit leaders that would differ. And, our model is we have dues revenue we have different sources of revenue. We're not like just grant funded, but many nonprofits have different models. So I think, yeah, I would agree with that. I think the more we can think about running excellent small enterprises of whatever underlying legal structure they are, the better we will perform.
cool. Super cool way to frame that thinking, because it's slowly changing how I think about it. Given the space that you're in, second to last question. So now it's super big, but I guess generally speaking, are you optimistic about?
I am I'm a fundamentally optimistic person, not in a like naive or Pollyanna way, but I really believe that if well, two things. One, I work with incredible people on my staff in our member community globally, our nonprofit community globally. So I feel like there's so many awesome people doing great work and like working really hard and staying committed that like every day I'm like touching inspiration. And so I do feel like knowing that that's there and that is, that's a pretty big community of stakeholders. I do feel optimistic. I also, the second part is we'll never achieve anything positive if we don't believe that we can achieve anything positive. So I'm going to start there, which doesn't mean I don't see obstacles in the road when they're there, but if I focus on the obstacles, we'll stop at the obstacles. So that's more of the like just belief system that I operate with. But
I think more people need to hear that, and then hopefully choose to internalize similar view, because it's gotten you where you are, and it's gotten 1% for the planet where they are and where they're going because of that. So that's awesome. Last thing, related question, and it can be something overarching and it can be something specific for you, but what inspires you?
what inspires me? Well, I mentioned that, on the regular, I'm inspired by, I get to talk to a member or a nonprofit or one of my staff members, and just, pretty much every day I have, one of those conversations that inspires me. I would say the other thing that inspires me is just getting outdoors and like seeing the resilience of the natural world, and just like actually there's this tree on my like regular walk that has clearly been like battered by storms, but it's still growing. And so it has all these like misshapen things, but then there's this like new shoot of growth. And I'm like, okay, so like there's an example of hundreds of years of like facing many, many challenges and still like finding its way to the sunshine. So I know that may sound like kind of a cheesy metaphor, but I really do like, think about that because, there are definitely hard times when you feel like you're getting like shaded or, pushed in a certain direction, or like just hard to get through something, or like the external environment is really tough to operate in. And, I think just having visuals of, natural things, or just like people who have like walked the path before me and have navigated hard things, and just remembering like, but there's a lot of great examples of resilience out there. So that to me is a strong inspiration.
Ripples in the world. Keep it going. Everybody be a tree. Kate, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
have so many more questions, but we're coming up on time.
Yeah,
I hope you come back so we can dive more into it. I think that was extremely insightful. Thank you to everybody that was
thank
listening
you.
as well. And yeah, I hope everybody, including you, Kate, have an awesome day. Thank you for tuning in. All right. Thank you so much.